So there's a lot of review on those skill sets, right? The things that we covered, the timelines, the tables, and everything. But it still is kind of marching through history. So there's going to be some details there. We're going to go out past World War II into the Cold War as we're reviewing. So it won't be as much as of a review of the history part, but more of the skill sets. And also just, we'll need to, consider the additional information that we're getting today as far as the history side of it. And I'll have, a nice, more terms for you guys. Hopefully that's helping. I put a video up yesterday about the start of World War I because it's so confusing. So that might help you guys too. So we'll go ahead and launch in here to the Unit 2 review. Okay. Same directions as before. Read the directions on each slide carefully. Be sure you understand what the question is asking you to do before submitting your response. And then we don't need a calculator, so that shouldn't be an issue there. I think there might be a little bit of math like before we ran into with the years and stuff, but okay. And yeah, starting right off with a map of the Russian Revolution. Latoya, you want to read our section for number 1 here?
Let's say in 1970, during the late stages of World War I, social and economy conflict drove Russian society into crisis. In February 1917, Tsar,
yeah.
Nicholas II left power and the provisional government took over. In October, the
Bolsheviks.
Say it one more time.
Bolsheviks.
We just gonna say the B. Led the Vladimir.
Yep, Vladimir Lenin. Mm-hmm.
Lenin overthrew the provisional government during the next 2 years. What was it? Lenin and Leo Trotsky.
Yeah.
Trotsky helped the I can't see it. Help to
fortify
the B-word Russian Red Army. Opposing the Red Army was the White Army, led by generals such as Admiral, what's the K word?
Kolchak
and General
Denikin.
The White Army had military success against the Red Army in 1918. In early 1919, Kolchak moved his troops across the Ural towards Moscow, and Denikin pushed towards Moscow from the south. However, Russia's civil war began to turn in favor of the Red Army during the summer of 1919. The Red Army, unlike the White Army, commanded strong internal communication lines and clear leadership. Ultimately, the Red Army supported the establishment of the world's first communist state, which eventually became the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR. In the decade to come, the USSR supported the spread of communism around the world. The United States viewed communism as a political and ideological threat. The political difference paved the way for the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, or the US. The question is, to what did the US object after the aftermath of the Russian Revolution? D.
Yeah, D, the spread of communism. Lots of fun Russian names in there, right?
Man, that makes no sense.
The one problem here too, like a word like Tsar, Tsar, the Russian alphabet is a different alphabet. So a lot of times when we see, the same thing with like Arabic letters and things like that, we just choose a phonetic, way to spell it. And you'll see different spellings of Tsar. Sometimes you see like Czar or Csar, but basically that's a royalty, right? That was the monarch of the Russian Empire at the time of the Bolshevik Revolution. And yeah, so this was in the midst of of World War I, and you had the Bolshevik Revolution led by Vladimir Lenin, who was a communist, to oust the Tsar and replace the government. So they dropped out of World War I because of all the internal turmoil, which is another reason why the U.S. entered, because France and Britain needed help because Russia wasn't fighting in the war anymore. And then they, of course, they took over the Russian government, and began that's the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So we tend to think of Russia as the main power in that. But remember all those Stan countries that we saw before, except for Afghanistan, but like Takistan and Kazakhstan and everything, they were part of the USSR later on, and some other states as well. And yeah, so our problem with it was like it says, a political and ideological threat viewed by the United States, right? It's so far different than our capitalist society and our democracy that we were concerned, of the spread of this around the world. And even before the Bolshevik Revolution, we were, trying to weed out communists in the U.S. We would look for them around union or labor movements and things like that, because that's usually where they would try to infiltrate. So it was really, it was always a big issue. We really saw that as completely opposed to the way we wanted the world to work in a capitalist and democratic society. So even from 1917, that's why when we get to World War II and Russia is our ally, the USSR is our ally, we're suspicious of them because of communism. So we're never sure how far we can trust them, and we really didn't want to trust them that much, but we needed them to help us defeat Germany. So on to number 2. Christiana, you want to read question 2 for us?
Okay, question 2. What was one effect of the Russia Revolution on the US? Is it the Cold War?
There you go. Yeah, C as in cat, the Cold War, which doesn't come until later, right? That's 1917 is when the Bolshevik Revolution happens, the Russian Revolution. 30 years pass really before the Cold War. It's after the end of World War II. But that is, as far as the cause and effect, that's what leads to the Cold War, is the spread of communism across Europe and Asia, or the fear of it. All right. And so some census information. So now we're looking at our table, right? That was one of the things from Unit 2 is understanding tables. So our columns, right, running up and down, where we have different parts of Europe right? Northern Europe, Western Europe, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and where they're immigrating from to the US. So, and then each row we have, it seems to be organized numerically, right? So by the numbers here, Ireland had the most at 1890 from the 1890 census. All right. And Sasha Gay, would you like to read number 3 for us?
Okay. By 1890, the greatest number of European immigrants had come to the US from which European region? Eastern. D.
It's
A.
A, yeah,
A.
northern. The thing that's a little confusing about this table is that they throw some text at the bottom of the first column. So yeah, so underneath is the number. So it's kind of easy to miss there. So it was over 4 million had immigrated from Northern Europe, which is not real surprising, right? Because that is your Britain, as it says there, Britain, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, parts of Scandinavia. So if you think about the early settlers, and you think about through the 1800s, particularly with the Irish, there was a lot of manual labor. They came here to work in the mines and in factories and things like that. So yeah, so A for number 3. Okay, and Grace, you want to take number 4?
Okay. After 1890, there was a regional shift in European immigration to the US, which European region with the smallest number of immigrants by 1890 likely saw an increase. The southern, C?
Yeah, C, southern. Right, it's okay. Well, all right, my screen keeps kind of flashing on me. Yeah, so we see the least amount here, right? 216,000 by that time. But again, that's one that's going to pick up on us a little bit later. We have more Italian immigrants towards the turn of the century. And it's also worth pointing out, these groups, Ireland, the Irish, particularly Irish and Italian and Polish, they were picked on, right? They weren't really favored groups to be immigrating, and there was some racism towards them and bigotry when they started coming here. So that's worth pointing out there. And number 5, the permanent members of the League of Nations. Etta, you want to read number 5 for us?
Okay. The League of Nations was an international organization established after World War I, created as part of the peace treaty that ended the war. The purpose of the League was to preserve international peace and prevent the outbreak of future conflicts. United States President Woodrow Wilson was a strong supporter of the League of Nations. However, many members of Congress opposed the idea of the United States joining the organization. The League of Nations strove to achieve its goals through the protection of permanent and member countries and their boundaries against aggressors' nations, the establishment of a world court, and disarmament. What can you infer based on the information presented in the passage in the table? A, the League of Nations allowed just allied nations and neutral countries to join. B, the United States never joined the League of Nations. C, the League of Nations Council included just 6 member nations. Or D, Woodrow Wilson served as a member of the League of Nations World Court. Probably B.
Yeah, and that was another one of our skill sets, right? Inferring inferences, making inferences. So, right, it says up here,
International organizations.
yeah, even though Woodrow Wilson was a strong supporter, many members of Congress opposed the idea, the United States joining the organization. He was actually, I believe, the one who had actually first came up with the idea. And, that was the predecessor to the United Nations that we have today, which came out of World War II for very much the same reasons, to prevent another conflict like that and to intervene when there's, trouble around the world, humanitarian crisis and things like that. It's very difficult for them all to work together because of the Security Council is all basically who we consider the victors of World War II are, much like here the League of Nations is sort of the same, that different here because it's not the victors, it's also Germany and Italy, which were, well, Italy eventually joined the Allies, but was initially an ally of Germany. But it's, it just kind of collapsed. And of course, after World War I, the United States was going back into its isolationist way and just didn't see they were, worried about outside influence and worried about us, kind of sticking our nose into other people's business. So we, went back to our sort of isolationist tendencies at the end of World War I. All right, and number 6. So Latoya, we want to read question 6 for us?
It's like, what can be inferred about the long-term success of the League of Nations? A, it stopped invasions by aggressor nations for more than 50 years. It don't say nothing about no 50 years in the passage.
There you go, right?
The member nations of the council enjoy peace relations for many decades. C, it was taken over by the US Congress. Or D, it did not achieve peace by protecting its members from aggressor nations. B?
Here's a hint. We don't have a World War I without a what? Without World War II, right? So it's D.
D.
Yeah, D is in
that
dog.
was my first option.
There you go. Yeah. So it just didn't work. And it took, about 30 and about 22, 23 years. We were, back in a even worse war that was, even bloodier and the worst war that the world has ever, world history has ever seen. So again, same thing with the United Nations, the League of Nations. They don't have a lot of power, right? Because I've mentioned this word before: sovereignty, right? As a sovereign nation, you don't have other people telling you what to do. And of course, that's always a criticism by some in the United States, that as a member of the United Nations, we, agree to things that maybe we, are making us more of a world government or something like that. But so it's hard to make these binding agreements and things that are actually going to prevent conflicts through the United Nations, or at that time through the League of Nations. So ultimately it did fail. Now you can say that the United Nations now is a little more, we haven't had another world war, and we have United Nations has kind of stepped in to prevent some atrocities and things like that, but it still lacks, a lot of power to go in and do something when things happen internally in a country. If it happens between countries, it's different, but things like a genocide or humanitarian crisis, things like that, that's within the borders of a country, it's hard to do because of sovereignty. You could do whatever you want to your own people, and the United Nations can't do anything about it. Some other nations might, unilaterally do something, invade you or take over, things like that, but the United Nations can. All right. Oh, yay, fascism. Everybody's favorite topic. Christiana, you want to read number 7 for us about Benito Mussolini?
Okay. Number 7. Sorry. Italian Prime Minister Benito Mussolini. And this is what the word is.
Mussolini.
Okay, Mussolini. Co-wrote the following excerpt in 1932 as part of an encyclopedia entry on fascism. For fascism, the growth of empire, that's to say the expansion of the nation, is an essential manifestation of vitality, and it composites a sign of decadence. People which are rising again after a period of decadence are always imperious. And this is what the word
Imperialist.
are always
Always
imperialist.
imperialist.
Okay. And reunion is a sign of decay and death. Sorry. Fascism is a doctrine best adapted to represent the tendencies and the aspiration of a people, like the people of Italy, who are rising again after many centuries of abusement and foreign servitude. For never before has a nation stood more in need of authority, of directions and order. If every age has its own characteristic doctrine, there are 1,000 signs which point to fascism as the characteristic doctrine of our time. The question says, which of the following is the main idea of Mussolini and gentle conveyance? Well, is it the B?
B. So 7 is D. D is in dog. The doctrine of fascism is critical to Italy's rise. So, you know, we hear that term fascism thrown around a lot today. You know, everybody's a fascist anymore for some reason. Joe Biden's a fascist, Donald Trump is a fascist, Barack Obama's a fascist. The thing about fascism, when it pops up here in Italy and then Spain, and Adolf Hitler really liked the ideas behind fascism too, so we can pretty much consider him a fascist as well. It's a far right, very conservative idea, in the fact that it's reactionary. It believes in very traditional ways. The old ways were better. That's the idea of conservatism. It's a very masculine idea, and it's you know, really about bending people to your will is one way to look at it. And so you have characters like Mussolini and what's his name, Franco, I believe, in Spain, and you know, Hitler, you know, that are basically doing that, bending people to their will. and it comes at a time, right? 1932 is when this is starting to take root in Italy. Thinking about the fallout from World War I. There's a lot of division across Europe. There's trying to rebuild. This is after the Great Global Depression, so people are looking for new ideas or new forms of leadership. So that's why these particular men and these ideas really stick, because of a time of turmoil, and they're looking for something new. They look at what has been done in the past as failing, right? So we talked about Germany and the hyperinflation and things that were happening. So a similar situation in Italy is taking place here. So this idea is very, it's strong. And he uses these types of words. It is the time for fascism. It's the characteristic doctrine of our time. So 7, D as in dog, and 8, our same passage. Sasha Gay, would you like to read number 8 for us?
Okay. In addition to fascism, what is the totalitarian form of government played? What other totalitarian form of government played a key role in the events of World War II? A, federalism. B, socialism. C, democracy. D, what's that word?
Nazism. Yeah, Nazism.
C.
D. D as in dog, Nazism. So like I was saying, it's totalitarian, is it's a centralized form of government, and it's dictatorial, where you tend to have a lot of your power centralized into not just a central government, but into one individual. And that is really defines Nazism, and it defines fascism. There's usually it's not a monarchy, right? It's different. There's sort of a maybe a puppet government, like you have like legislative branches and stuff like that. But really, generally speaking, there's a dictator at the top that is the law of the land. And that's why Nazism as another type of totalitarian government was why Hitler looked at fascism and was like, hey, I like what you got going on there, Mussolini. We have a lot of similar ideas. We're sharing a lot of a similar ideology, which is of course why they were also allied in World War II, Italy and Germany. So, and of course, democracy would speak more to the U.S. government. Our allies, France and Britain, we consider ourselves Western liberal democracies. Liberal, it's a lowercase l, not like liberal as far as like the Democratic Party or something. But we support civil rights, individual rights, freedom of choice, things like that. Socialism, it's more of it's sort of both governance but it's more of an economic system where you're the state, the country owns the means of production and things like that, sort of like communism. And federalism is just the throwback to what we talked about in early American history, right? Federalism is a form of centralized government, but it's also democratic. So D as in dog for Nazism, and again, fascism here. So Grace, you want to read question 9 for us?
Okay. Which of the following represents a resident error that Mussolini makes in this aspect? A, he appeals to the beliefs of his audience. B, he makes absolute and universal claim. C, he focuses on the people of Italy. And then D, he defines terminology. C?
B as in boy, right? He makes absolute and universal claims. This one, we really haven't talked about, an error in reasoning. This is something that has kind of gone a little bit above and beyond what we've discussed. But if you look at what he's talking about, right, it's kind of like generalizing. What, when we talked about in language arts and stuff, he uses these very strong words. Fascism is the doctrine best adapted to represent the tendencies and the aspirations of the people. That's this absolute. Look for words like that. Essential manifestation of vitality. Talking about something in absolute terms like that is a error in reasoning. All right. So B is in boy for number 9. Etta, let's see here. Well, let's take a look. See if we actually have some text. We don't really have much text here, just at the top here. It says when the United States was founded in 1945, when the United Nations was founded in 1945, approximately 1/3 of the world's population lived in colonial territories. Today, fewer than 2 million people live under colonial rule in the 17 remaining non-self-governing territories. And here we have a list of those non-self-governing territories. And we see, our first column is the territory itself. Africa in the Western Sahara there's disputed territory, and you have the highest probably population there of over 500,000 people. Then it goes right down Atlantic and Caribbean, and you see who's there, right? The United Kingdom. Britain still has these territories that they've held on to, mostly, like you think about the Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, a lot of the Caribbean islands are basically still under British control. And then lo and behold, that country that always talked about self-governance has a few of their own. So the United States, right, has territory in the Virgin Islands, and we have the American Samoas and Guam that are under our control. And then, towards the bottom, we have France here, New Zealand, and a few others. So yeah, there's still colonial rule out there. There's still colonial territories, mostly held, as we see, by Britain. And I, joked before about Britain has spawned more Independence Days around the world than any other country. So Etta, why don't you go ahead and read number 10 for us here, the question.
Okay, let me see. Which administrator governs the largest number of the remaining 17 non-self-governing colonies? A, United Kingdom, B, United States, C, France, or D, New Zealand? C, maybe?
A, United Kingdom. So if you look there, number 10, if you look back at the table, right? If we, it's not really talking about population or anything, just the number of administrated areas. And we roll down through our list there, and it's all, United Kingdom, United Kingdom. Yeah, and then a handful for the United States, a couple for France. So yeah, A, United Kingdom for 10. And that is a direct effect, right? If we're thinking about cause and effect, that is a direct effect from their time as like the dominant power in the world. And they were, and you think about it, a lot of those are, island nations. So that was where they projected their sea power. And it was strategic for them to hold these islands. And of course they had, India, parts of India colonized and things like that as well. But that's a throwback to the time when they were the dominating world power. Okay, and now we have a new table on Holocaust victims. So, Latoya, you want to read the text underneath there?
You know I can't read.
Okay, that's fine.
Oh,
That's
I'll read
fine.
it, y'all.
Okay,
I'll read it.
okay. No Russian words in this one.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
They say a Nazi party came to power in Germany in March of 1933, and Adolf Hitler was
Dictator.
dictator of Germany. The Nazis were affected at blaming the Jewish people for Germany's economy disaster after World War I. I said war twice, but y'all ain't catch that. The anti-Semitic momentum and Hitler absolute power enabled him to pursue what he called the final solution. With Germany victories early in the World War II, Jews were trapped in Europe. On June 22nd, 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Nazis killed Unions, swept through the Soviet Union, killing 500,000 Jews. In 1942, concentration and extermination camps were built throughout Europe along main rail lines. The Nazis
Systematically.
Executed and cremated another 3.5 million Jews. Ultimately, more than 6 million Jews died at the hands of the Nazis. Question,
Yeah,
after Poland, you go ahead and talk.
Oh no, that's just saying it's just some of the ugliest points in human history is right here. So you go ahead, read the question.
After Poland and the Soviet Union, which region had the most Holocaust victims? Is it? They said after Poland and the Soviet Union. So then was the too high? Is it Romania?
Yeah, Romania. This is a lot of information to look at, right? But right there at the bottom, they have some of the higher numbers. Hungary had a lot, Czechoslovakia, but here we have the top three here: Soviet Union, Poland, and Romania. And they were taken by rail to concentration camps and extermination camps. And as I mentioned, before, with the rise of Hitler, times were bad in Germany. They got blamed for World War I. They were embarrassed by that. Economic hardship around the world because of the Great Depression. And on top of Hitler being this really effective orator and charismatic individual who had a new way, he blamed the Jewish community for a lot of the economic ills and woes of Germany, because at the time there was a lot of Jewish people in banking, so a lot of the debt. They were creditors, right? They had made a lot of loans and stuff. So that was how he sort of dug into them for causing the economic problems, which is more than just erroneous. It's just stupid. But he was able to get the German people behind him to convince them that was the truth. And later, what happens, we see this over and over again in history, is you start, the othering of people, where you start blaming them for things, you alienate them, and you dehumanize them. And once you take somebody's humanity away, it's a lot easier to do whatever you want to with them. And so that's exactly what happened, in Germany. Due to Hitler, right? Because we see this is happening in other countries because of German occupation, and they're moving Jewish people into concentration camps. So Romania for number 11, Romania. It wasn't, I should probably also point out, it wasn't just Jewish people. Communists were often, taken into camps. Handicapped people were just largely executed. They were just killed. Were not even, moved to camps. And of course, the final solution they're talking about there is just the eradication of the Jewish population. That's the final solution. Homosexuals were imprisoned or moved to camps. Just anybody that was different from the German people were in trouble. You risk being killed or moved into a camp. So fun stuff. Christiana, you want to read number 12 for us?
Okay, number 12. It says, according to the information, how did the Nazis transport Jews to the camp? The Nazis transport Jews to the camp by the train?
By train. And it says here rail lines. I think what we want to put in our fill in the blank box here is rail. So Nazis transported Jews to the camps by rail, R-A-I-L.
Rail.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And 13. Sasha Gay, you want to read 13?
Okay. How did Adolf Hitler categorize the systematic extermination of the Jewish people? Hitler called it the
Was it the final solution?
There you go. Yeah, right there at the end of the first paragraph. And that's a little test taking tip for you too. If they're putting something in quotes in your fill in the blanks, you're probably going to need to find the quotes in your text. So final solution for number 13. FINALSOLUTION. Oh, and some fun history on the Japanese internment camps. So Grace, you want to read on number 14 for us, our little paragraph here?
Okay. In February 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt ordered all Americans of Japanese descendants into internment camps. Roosevelt's decision was based on fear of espionage, racism among Americans, and concerns for national security. This action was just 2 months after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, forcing the United States officially into World War II. More than 120,000 US citizens, many of whom were born in the US and had never been to Japan, were sent to one of 10 military-like camps located in 7 states. Question: fear of what activity did President Roosevelt use to justify his actions in February 1942? He used fear of espionage to justify his actions.
Very good. Yeah, espionage, which is spying, basically, right? He was afraid that there's going to be Japanese spies giving information to the Japanese empire. So ESPIONAGE. O-N-A-G-E. And, you just get a sense here of what we've been talking about. Human beings are kind of fearful people. We like to point blame at people, and we always want to know, we don't like uncertainty as the human race. So we want to feel secure. And just the fact that, we had, over 100 some thousand, Japanese Americans, we were afraid of, for no good reason, of course. But it's one of those parts in our history, that is another really sort of dark spot on our history about how we treated some of our own citizens because of the war. I don't know if you guys, any Star Trek fans out there, but George Takei, who's, older, I guess he's in his 80s or 90s now, who's on the original Star Trek series, as a child was in one of the internment camps when he was little. As far as treatment goes, if you want to compare that to what happened in Germany, they were treated better. The idea wasn't to eradicate them, but we did suppress their rights. We did take away their rights and basically move them into something that's not much different than a prison. And before the war was over, we were already letting them back out, which was really sort of ironic too. It just showed that it was just to try to do something to make us, I think, feel better. So 14 is espionage. 15. Etta, you want to read 15 for us?
Okay. Based upon the camp locations on the map, in which part of the United States would you infer that most Japanese Americans lived in 1942? Most Japanese Americans lived in the
So if we're just kind of thinking north, south, east, west, right? Our main directions. Where do you see like the most of the camps? What side of the United
West.
States? Yeah. So yeah, most of that population was in the western, W-E-S-T-E-R-N, the western United States. And that kind of follows, right? Because if they immigrated from Japan, they would have moved across the Pacific, right? They didn't come through Ellis Island in New York. They came, across the Pacific into California, probably through Hawaii and over. But that's why most of them settled, on that side of the United States. All right. All right. So 15 was Western. 16. Latoya, you want to read 16 real quick?
And say, what problems still troubling Americans today was motivating a historical outcry that supported the Internment? Is it the E word?
It's the R word, racism. Yeah, so racism, R-A-C-I-S-M, right? It was just the idea, once again, it's when people don't look like you, it's a lot easier to treat them less than human. And that's basically, again, it's because here's the other thing, right? How many German Americans were living in the United States during World War II? A heck of a lot more than there were Japanese Americans. And so were they put in internment camps? You didn't hear about German internment camps in the United States. So that it really kind of tells you something, right? Because of course, Germans fit right into the traditional idea of white America. So that wasn't an issue. Should have been, because we did have some that were Nazis over here. But anyway, so yeah, racism for 16. And I'll just read this a little bit for the GI Bill. So the GI Bill on number 17, the GI Bill has been heralded as one of the most significant pieces of legislation ever produced by the federal government, one that impacted the United States socially, economically, and politically. And our table here, basically our table of information, talks about the cause and effect, right? So the cause for the GI Bill, veterans returning to the US from World War II faced unemployment and poverty and were undereducated. So you had, a lot of young guys that were coming back, were having difficulty finding work, had went right over, out of high school. So they didn't have a lot of job training. Basically, all they know how to do was, clean and fire a rifle out, that was their job training. Excuse me. So the effect then, of course, is on June 22nd, 1944. So before the war was over, right? This is well before the war was over. FDR signed the GI Bill, which was administered by the Veterans Administration to help veterans re-assimilate into society. Initially here, what it says, the bill provided for payments of $20 per week, non-taxable funds for college education, and they also had, good rates on loans for homes, farms, and businesses. So, and of course, it's been modified and amended, but that's still, really important piece of legislation, and was something that, of course, had bipartisan support. Right? You didn't have to worry. Everybody, when it comes to our veterans or soldiers, they tend to agree on, how they should be treated and what they deserve. So that was easy legislation to get passed. And then on 17 here, it says, which of the following is the main cause for passage of the GI Bill? A, Franklin Roosevelt was responsible for bringing the United States into World War II. B, unemployed veterans needed education, training, and assistance with housing. C, the Veterans Administration needed to add employees to its workforce. D, colleges and universities were lacking sufficient numbers of students.
B.
B, right? You had a lot of people coming back. So B as in boy for 17. Christiana, you want to read 18 for us?
Okay, 18. Which of the following is the most important effect of the GI Bill for the veterans? A, the Veterans Administration was found. B, the veterans received tax benefits. C, the veterans received school, job, and housing benefits. D, President Roosevelt was re-elected. Which is the most important? Is it a D?
C. C as in cat, right? So just generally thinking about the cause and effect. So what's the most important effect of the GI Bill for veterans is the fact that they can receive school, job, and housing benefits. So C as in cat for 18. Roosevelt was reelected and then dies right after that election in 40. He's elected in 45 and dies in 46. Yeah, so the other stuff we don't really, the VA was already around. It gets quite a boost from this new legislation, and it's going to get more, people working. And veterans receive tax benefits. Well, that kind of is wrapped into the other benefits as well. So 18 is C as in cat, and the Cold War. Our first look at the Cold War here on our timeline. Right now, we're jumping into those last sections of the unit, thinking about timelines. This one's in 5-year increments from 1945 to 1990. Covers basically all the Cold War. So just take a quick look here from 47 to 89. So they're basically putting the start of the Cold War around 1947. So U.S. adopts a policy of containment for fighting the Cold War with the Soviet Union. in 1947. We're going to get some more explanation of this in some of the text that comes below. So 1947, the Marshall Plan calls for a widespread program to rebuild Europe, really important, in an effort to fight the spread of communism. 1950, U.S. provides military aid to South Korea to fight communist forces in the north. 1955, U.S. provides military aid to South Vietnam to fight communist forces in the north. Sort of. And then 1961, conflict between the U.S. and Cuba, the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? So Cuba, Soviet Union over missile placements that threatens to erupt in a nuclear exchange. Closest we ever came to nuclear war at that time. Well, it's still today. And 1989, the Berlin Wall, a symbol of a politically divided Europe, comes down. Sasha Gay, you want to read question 19 for us?
Okay. During the Cold War, how did the US try to contain communism? A, it allowed the Soviet Union to place missiles in Cuba. B, it opposed the tearing down of the Berlin Wall. C, it adopted policies to isolate itself from Europe and Asia. D, it provided aid reconstruction in Europe and for military conflicts in Asia. Is it C?
Yeah, it's D. D is a dog. So after World War II, I've talked about, after World War I, we were isolationists. Before World War I, we were isolationists. After World War II, we stopped, we continued to be a force in the world, to have our influence in the world. And a lot of that was to deal with the threat of communism. So we'll read some more here about it. And just so you guys know, this is what I study. This is my area of focus in my history program. So D is a dog. That's why I was questioning this 1955. U.S. provides aid to South Vietnam to fight communist forces in the north, because I think we were, really aiding the French military to help them reestablish their colonies. It's French Indochina around South Vietnam, but I won't criticize Paxton too much for that. D as in dog for 19. Let's see, Grace, you want to read 20 for us?
Okay. 20. Britain's financial and physical losses during World War I and World War II were immense, and the former world power no longer had the ability to provide monetary or military assistance to countries such as Greece and Turkey, both of which had suffered drastic losses during the wars. Greece was undergoing a civil war, and Turkey needed financial assistance, given their proximity to the communist Soviet Union. It seemed possible that both countries might fall under its growing regional power. United States government officials discussed the Domino Theory, which predicted that if any nation fell to Soviet communism, weakened neighboring states will also fall. President Harry S. Truman agreed to address the issue in a joint session of Congress, which will be nationally broadcast. On March 12, 1947, in an address now known as the Truman Doctrine, the president declared it to be Americans' duty to assist any country threatened by communism. I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free people who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. I believe that we must assist free peoples to work out their own destinies in their own way. I believe that our help should be primarily through economic and financial aid, which is essential to economic stability and orderly political processes. Truman's request was for $400 million to assist both Greece and Turkey. Congress approved the presidential's request and signed it into law on May 2nd, 1947. Question: what was President Truman's justification for requesting financial assistance to Turkey and Greece? The president wanted the United States to take the place of Britain as a world power. B, the president wanted the countries to become democratic. C, the countries had fallen to the Soviet Union and had become communist countries. And D, the countries were weakened, close to the Soviet Union and vulnerable to communism. D?
Yep, D as in dog for number 20. Yeah, so, after World War II, Europe is wrecked, right? It's war torn. It's figuratively and literally destroyed. Economically, there's trouble. Morale is low. It's bad times. The United States came out of World War II looking pretty darn good because we didn't. The only attack that we suffered was Pearl Harbor, so we were all in good shape as far as not having to physically rebuild. We were a creditor nation because so many people owed us money, and we like the Lend-Lease Act and all this stuff. So we were in really good shape as far as economically. The providing for the war effort, had put a lot of Americans back to work and boosted us out of the Great Depression. And then we look around the world and we see communism as this ideological and political threat to the world, not just the United States, but to democracy and freedom of choice, just all of this, the individual rights and civil liberties. So we were going to fight it, and we were going to contain it. Is the operative word there. So the domino theory, like they said, is like we were scared if one of these countries that borders the Soviet Union falls to communism, right? Just like dominoes, they're all going to start tipping and falling. So that, that's how we get into the Vietnam War. That's how we get into the Korean War. All these ideas that we have to fight it. We're not going to fight the Soviet Union directly because eventually that's going to lead to nuclear war. Not at this point because Soviet Union really doesn't have nuclear weapons. We have like 4. But as we go along, that's going to become an issue where we can't directly engage the Soviet Union because that's going to end up in a nuclear war. So we're looking at all these points that where can we contain communism? Where can we box the Soviet Union in? And first off, we have to deal with Europe because it's fallen apart. So the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe. And then the Truman Doctrine to help Greece and Turkey to prevent them from falling to communism. So we've totally parted with our isolationist ways. We are going to exert our influence. We're going to help Europe rebuild because that's where communism is going to take hold. It's in these places where there's economic strife and, the world's not helping. So that's where we start seeing this divide in the world. They call it the bipolar world under the Cold War. And you have the first world that is the United States and all of its allies, right? A lot of Western Europe. The second world is the Soviet Union and its allies. And the third world, that's where that term comes from that we hear so much, is the rest of the world. And that's where we're competing for influence. And it just happened, we say third world country, and we often mean a economically developing country. That was just coincidence, right? And that's why we use that term today. But that just happened to be not all of them, but a lot of them were economically developing countries at that time. So, 21. So 20 was D, as in dog. The countries were weakened, close to the Soviet Union, and vulnerable to communism. 21. Etta, you want to read 21 for us?
Okay, what Effect of the domino theory worried U.S. government leaders. A, the U.S. might have to support countries formerly supported by Britain. B, if one nation fell to communism, another weak neighboring nation might also fall. If the United States provided financial assistance to one country, other weak neighboring countries would expect aid. D, small countries such as Greece or Turkey cannot govern themselves properly. Is it A?
B, right? So just like the idea of dominoes falling. So if one nation fell to communism, another weak neighboring nation might also fall. So B as in boy, that was the fear. So that's why we wanted to intervene and contain it. So that's why we get involved on both sides of Europe and Asia. So we're trying to support, and we're gonna find out about East Germany and West Germany here in a minute. We're gonna help West Germany. We're gonna bolster our Western European allies against the threat of communism. And then over on the other side of the world, we do the same thing. That's why we get into the Korean War. That's why we get into the Vietnam War. And a lot of those lines, which we're going to find out here in a minute, came out of World War II. So the line that separates North and South Korea, right, at the 38th parallel today, was occupation zones of U.S. and its allies in the South and the Soviet Union in the North. And that was just all it was an administrative line. It's like, okay, you're going to take care of the people up here, or we're going to take care of the people down here. And we see what happened, right? That's only thing. And it was, they looked at that and they looked at Korea and it's like, that's about middle right there. Let's separate it right there. And that's, same thing with Vietnam, where you had North and South Vietnam. So yeah, let me read this one here. Number 22. So the communist government of East Germany constructed the Berlin Wall in 1961 to prevent East Germans from fleeing the communist nation for the democratic nation of West Germany. East German troops heavily guarded the wall to prevent crossings. While a few citizens managed to cross this boundary, many people attempting to cross into West Berlin lost their lives. However, by the summer of 1989, the Hungarian government began to allow East Germans to travel through Hungary in order to reach Austria and West Germany. This development rendered the wall obsolete. By the fall of 1989, the East German government had nearly collapsed. On November 9th, 1989, the government granted citizens the freedom to move across the boundary into West Germany. In 1990, the wall was torn down and East Germany and West Germany reunited as a single nation. So that was also, occupation zones. So after the war, Soviet Union had a part of East Germany. U.S. and its allies, Britain and France, were taking West Germany. We were occupying it to help rebuild, to ensure there wasn't a great turmoil or another rise of another Hitler or anything like that. Berlin was the capital. It's well inside East Germany, but there was occupation zones there as well. Soviet Union had East Berlin, and United States, France, and Britain had West Berlin. So we were actually, had people inside East Germany in the western side of Berlin. Now, it wasn't until 1961 that they put up the wall. There was still an East Berlin before 1961, but there was freedom to move about. What they realized is people are leaving and not coming back. So let's put up a wall. And there was some, conflicts along the way. We were, Soviet Union and the United States was pointing tanks at each other at one point. Early on, you may hear the Berlin airlift because they were trying to blockade West Berlin and keeping us from delivering goods and supplies. We had this huge airlift to get supplies into West Berlin. And then towards the end of the communist regime, towards the end of the days of the Soviet Union, they started opening up and the East German state was starting to collapse, they didn't want the wall to actually come down at first, though. They were going to allow movement between East Berliners and West Berliners, but they just couldn't stop it at that point. Once the gate was open, it was open, and the wall came down. So 22 then, which of the following statements is the main idea of the passage? A, the Berlin Wall was favored by most East Germans. B, the Berlin Wall was a hostile dividing line between communism and democracy. C, East Germans viewed West Germany as a hostile nation. Or D, East Germans tried to escape through Hungary.
B.
Yeah, it was a very symbolic, right? Solid. This really represented the divide between communism and democracy. A very, very visual representation. So B, the Berlin Wall, a hostile dividing line between communism and democracy. All right, so 23. Latoya, you want to read 23 for us? Question 23.
It says, for how many years were East and West Germany divided? So 61. And 89.
They're actually going with 90.
Oh, they're going with 90?
Yeah, from when the wall came down.
So B?
C, 29 years, right? So born in 61, you would have been 29 in 1990. So 23 is C as in cat. So from 61 to 90, and that's only when the wall was there. It was still divided before 61, but you had some freedom of movement. But yeah, so C is in cat for 23, and then 24. I'll go ahead and read this here so we can finish up here. So after World War II, President Truman adopted a policy of containment and built a global network of anti-communist alliances. The first network was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, as a result of the Soviet blockade of the city of Berlin. That was before the wall came up, which was inside the Soviet-controlled part of Germany. And the resulting Berlin airlift in June 1948, President Truman declared his intention to provide military aid to Western Europe. The United States and Canada, along with 10 Western countries, signed the North Atlantic Treaty to establish NATO on April 4th, 1949, to counter the threat from the Soviet Union. The 10 signatories from Europe were Belgium, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, and the United States. The United Kingdom. The cornerstone of NATO was that all members agreed to come to each other's aid if they were attacked. NATO committed the United States by treaty to the defense of Western Europe. It also ensured that the United States would not pursue a policy of isolationism, as it had after World War I when it tried to stay out of European affairs. NATO was further expanded when Turkey and Greece joined the original countries in 1952. The Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, joined in 1955, and Spain joined in 1982. Today, there are 28 independent member countries. The remilitarization of West Germany was used as an excuse by the Soviet Union to form the communist equivalent to NATO, the Warsaw Pact, which was signed by Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and the Soviet Union in Warsaw, Poland on May 14th, 1955. This military treaty bound its signatories to come to the aid of the others, should any of them be the victim of foreign aggression. Although the Warsaw Pact was based on total equality of each nation and mutual non-interference in one another's internal affairs, it quickly became a powerful political tool for the Soviet Union. The sole legal defector after its formation was Albania, which withdrew in 1968 in protest of the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. Following the diminishing power of the USSR in the 1980s and the eventual fall of communism, the Warsaw Pact was officially dissolved in 1991. And yeah, so NATO is one of the strongest and probably most successful mutual defense pacts. And then what they're talking about there with it's Article 5, and it's basically an attack on one is an attack on all. So, the whole idea behind it is like, if, the Soviet Union was to mess with, Iceland or Luxembourg, right? They're going to have to deal with the United States. That was the whole intention behind that, right? If you attack one of us, you attack all of us, but in particular, you're attacking the United States. So it really gave protection to these smaller countries, giving them this collective defense. Interesting enough, Article 5 has only been invoked by one country in its history. One country asked their allies to come to their aid. Does anybody know who that is? No guesses? It was us. It was the United States. After 9/11, we used NATO and Article 5 to say we were attacked. So Germany and Great Britain and everybody else, you need to come and help us. And that's why you had Luxembourg soldiers in Afghanistan. It was a NATO operation, not just an American one. It was under NATO. So that was the difference between that and our war in Iraq too. So yeah, we're the only one that's actually ever evoked Article 5. But here you have the Warsaw Pact countries and our NATO countries. So the green ones, NATO. The white ones are neutral, right? So Switzerland, Austria, Yugoslavia. Remember we talked about Yugoslavia and all how it was broken up into all the little countries. At that point, it was a communist country, but it was neutral. Sweden and Finland also neutral at that point. And then the pink countries are the Warsaw Pact countries, East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. And then, of course, you can see our NATO friends over here. So let's see here. Christiana, you want to read 24 for us? No? Latoya, you want to read?
They say after the original 12, how many more countries have joined NATO? Is it 16?
28. Yeah. I'm sorry, wait. 20. No, wait, was it?
I thought it was 28.
Yeah.
And then
You're
I
right.
subtracted the 12 that was already there.
You're right. It's 20, it's 16. So 28 total. And we had 16 join. So yeah, you got it. Yeah, C is in cat on 24. And 25, that's the same text. Etta, you want to read 25?
23 is C, Etta.
Yeah, 23 is C. Were you in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so 23C, 24C, 25. You want to read, Etta?
Okay. I'm reading with the question.
Yeah, just the question.
The formation of NATO was in response to what threat from the Soviet Union? A, the invasion of Czechoslovakia. B, the Berlin airlift. C, the signing of the Warsaw Pact. Or D, the blockage of Berlin. The blockage of Berlin.
There you go.
D.
Yep. D. D is in dog. All right. And 26. I think we have the same here. Yep. Grace, you want to read 26 for us?
Okay. How did US foreign policy differ after World War II? A, it became isolationist. B, it became willing to intervene in European affairs. C, it supported the Soviet Union. And D, it did not pledge defense for Western Europe. B.
B, yeah, B as in boy, right? It became willing at that point after going through 2 world wars, realizing that maybe we can't stay out of it and continue to, you know, have democracy reign in Western Europe. So B as in boy for 26 and 27. Sasha Gay, you want to read 27 for us?
Why is the Warsaw Pact no longer in force? A, communism and the USSR fell. B, the Warsaw Pact countries joined NATO. C, the USSR nullified the Warsaw Pact. D, Czechoslovakia was invaded. Is it B?
A, communism and the USSR fell. So there wasn't anybody left. You know, at that point, it was just like where NATO is really backed by the United States, the Warsaw Pact was really backed by the USSR as the big power. So they're just, and you know, some of these other countries are in there. Of course, Germany had unified. So, you know, that wasn't there, they weren't there anymore. And these other countries had started moving more towards their Western allies or their Western Europe for help away from the Soviet Union. So A, 27, and I'll read a little bit here on Ronald Reagan. So number 28, President Ronald Reagan delivered the following speech at Germany's Berlin Wall in June of 1987. Very famous speech. The Berlin Wall divided democratic West Berlin from communist-controlled East Berlin and the rest of East Germany. In this speech, President Reagan addressed Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. And now the Soviets may, in a limited way, be coming to understand the importance of freedom. We hear much from Moscow about a new policy of reform and openness. Are these the beginnings of profound changes in the Soviet state, or are they token gestures intended to raise false hopes in the West, or to strengthen the Soviet system without changing it? There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate, Mr. Gorbachev. Open this gate, Mr. Gorbachev. Tear down this wall. Yeah, so, you know, again, that symbolic wall, you know, dividing the two worlds. So on 28, so which of the following best summarizes Reagan's purpose for delivering the speech? A, to encourage Soviet leadership to acknowledge, that is spelled wrong, to acknowledge the importance of freedom. B, to propose a treaty between the United States and the Soviet Union. C, to criticize communist policies in Eastern Europe. Or D, to proclaim American support for West Germany.
A?
A, yeah. And there were things slowly starting to change. Gorbachev, you know, he is basically the head of state in the Soviet Union, wanted a little more open society for the Soviet Union. But in doing so, it basically led to the collapse. They had like a problem with inflation once they started opening up markets and things. But, you know, he was someone that they thought that they were going to be able to work with. And a lot of things did change during his time. So 29, I'll go ahead and finish this out here. So what symbolic action does President Reagan want General Secretary Gorbachev to take? Raise false hopes in the West, B, perform token gestures, C, adopt a new policy of reform, or D, destroy the Berlin Wall.
Destroy the wall.
D.
Yeah, D. And, you know, keep in mind, right, he's talking to Gorbachev, but they're in Germany, right? They're in East Germany, who's supposedly has their own government, but we see basically who they're taking, you know, who they're falling in line with in East Germany, right? They're another communist state. They're a proxy basically of the Soviet Union. D as in dog for 29. Oh yeah, one final text here for the last two. So in 1989, as nations across Eastern Europe began to transition from communism to democratic forms of government, Mikhail Gorbachev and the Soviet Union chose not to intervene. This allowed democratic reforms to take place in nations such as Hungary, Poland, and Bulgaria. Gorbachev's many reforms also allowed opposition to communism to develop within the Soviet Union. In 1990, individual Soviet republics started to assert sovereignty over Soviet rule. By August 1991, a failed coup by conservative communist leaders led to increased support for democratic reforms. By November 1991, the Communist Party had been dissolved. Boris Yeltsin, a pro-democracy leader, negotiated the formation of the Commonwealth of Independent States. Gorbachev resigned on December 25th, 1991, and one day later, the Soviet Union officially dissolved. So that marks really the end of the Cold War, once we have the complete dissolution of the Soviet Union. Okay, and then 30, which evidence best supports the idea that not all Eastern Europeans supported democratic reform? A, conservative leaders staged a coup against the Soviet government. B, Gorbachev's reforms allowed growing opposition. C, democratic governments rose to power in nations such as Hungary and Poland. Or D, the Soviet Union chose not to intervene in outside conflicts.
B.
B.
A. So remember, you know, Gorbachev, he was cool with, you know, democratic reform. And he didn't intervene when, you know, Hungary and Poland and all these other countries started instituting, you know, more democratic practices. But in the Soviet Union, a failed coup, right? August 1991, a failed coup by conservative communist leaders led to increased support for democratic reforms. So yeah, A, conservative leaders staged a coup against the Soviet government. And finally, 31. So prior to this time, how did the Soviet Union most likely handle political unrest in Eastern Europe? A, by avoiding involvement in the internal affairs of the other Eastern European countries. B, by using military force to stop uprisings. C, by mediating peaceful resolutions. Or D, by seeking the assistance of the United States.
B.
B, right?
B.
They were, you know, heavy-handed with putting down unrest in Eastern Europe. You know, obviously they weren't going to ask for the United States for assistance. We didn't really hear much about mediating peaceful resolutions, like Czechoslovakia, right? They invade, you know, early on during the Cold War, and avoiding involvement in the internal affairs of other Eastern European countries. Well, we know that's not the case. You know, you could see that with the Warsaw Pact, things like that, that they were going to be involved. Same thing with East Germany. And that wraps up the unit review. All right, so everybody get the any need for any of the questions? There's a lot of them to go through, so I'm only going to go through every one. But if anybody missed anything, let's see what we got here. Is that 12?
No, I think she said 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, yeah. So 1, I think you came in late, didn't you? So 1 is D as in dog. 2 is C as in cat. And 3 is A. that get you caught up? Okay. So, that's a lot of history and a little bit of time.